the hospital. Two significant figures entered the picture in the period that followed. The first was Ploy's experience in the university corridor, the event that had confirmed for Kade beyond the shadow of remaining doubt that she was seeing real things and not performing. She'd come out of her room one evening in an obvious state of distress and asked him to take her somewhere immediately. She would not say where, just away. On the pavement outside the dormitory, she told him what she had seen. A man running toward her from the far end of the corridor over and over, running and being thrown back, something stopping him from reaching her. She said a man and a woman was standing with their arms open at the end where she stood waiting to receive the running man. She described them with uncomfortable specificity. Kade did not recognize the man, but the physical description she gave of the woman and the name given in full that the woman whispered to Ploy from across the corridor matched a person who had recently graduated from the university. He had found no work afterward and hanged himself from a tree at the back of the campus. Kade knew the name. He knew the face. He had never told Ploy. That settled the question permanently. The second figure was Uncle Wood, the man who had driven Leo that night to the land. He turned out to have been in Leo's employ for most of his adult life, having come into the family service through a history that Kade only learned about much later. On the night of the visit to Plot 5, after Leo had gone through his ritual with the earth and the shirt, Uncle Wood had walked off on his own into a corner of the yard. He stood there for a few minutes and then came back holding something. He said he had been speaking with someone in the trees. He said the person told him things about the land. The next morning, Kade had tried to reach Leo, and Leo had not answered. He tried for 2 days. He tried intermediaries. Nothing. He eventually gave up trying by phone and decided to go in person. He brought sweets he had driven to another province to buy enough for a small army stacked in bags in the back of his car. He arrived at Leo's house and was met by the housekeeper, who told him Leo was not at home. He left the sweets, asked, after Uncle Wood got his number, secondhand, called Uncle Wood from the road, and learned that Uncle Wood was in the hospital. Leo was in the hospital. Uncle Wood explained. Leo had become suddenly and violently ill, vomiting without cause, weakness, then unconsciousness, and had been admitted. He was now in the intensive care unit, and the prognosis was unclear. Kade went to the hospital. He found Leo in the ICU with a look on his face that Kade had never seen on a man who had always looked entirely certain of everything. He sat with Leo. He brought Ploy to sit with Leo. Ploy looked at the bed and said she saw 6 figures in the room. 2 were sitting on the bed, 1 at his head, 1 across his stomach. 4 were standing at the corners. She said all 6 were dark, not transparent in the way of ordinary sightings. Dark the way things are dark when they have been sent with intention. Kade understood then that what had come to the land to drive away intruders was not a haunting in the traditional sense. It had been summoned. Someone had placed something there, and the something had followed. Kade had the dream about the knife again. This time, the man in old-fashioned clothes was more insistent. In the dream, Kade was inside the hospital room, and the man handed him the cloth and said, "You remember what I told you?" Kade woke up and sat for a long time in the dark. He called Ploy in the morning. She said she thought she knew which knife he was talking about. She had seen one, only once, in passing at Leo's house, and she believed it was the same knife from Kade's dream. She said if that was the one, then it was the one that needed to be used. She said she could not tell him how to get it. Kade thought for a while and then called Leo's housekeeper. He explained, carefully and with considerable creativity about his reasons, that Leo had apparently mentioned lending him a specific knife for a housewarming ceremony, and that he needed to collect it. The housekeeper said she would have to check with the madam. The madam, Leo's wife, whose name was Nira, called back within the hour. Kade explained again, adding that Leo had mentioned it to him specifically in the last conversation they had had before Leo took ill, and that he had put money into an envelope as a deposit, which he would bring with him when he came. Nira said she would have to see. Kade drove to the house. He sat in the living room and handed over the envelope. He waited while Nira consulted with her anxiety about whether to let him into the room where the knife was kept. She eventually led him up a staircase past portraits of ancestors in frames he did not look at too carefully. She unlocked a door at the end of a short corridor and stood back. The room was full of objects the way the rooms of people who have lived long and acquired much tend to be full, carefully, with purpose, not randomly. Kade scanned the objects. He picked up this one feeling nothing particular from any of them. And then on a shelf, set apart from the others, he found one that had a painting on it. Small old, painted in a style that he could place as roughly 3 generations back. A man standing, wearing a light shirt with dark brown detailing at the collar. The clothes were the clothes from his dream. Kade did not say anything. He selected that knife, thanked Nira in the language of a man borrowing a kitchen implement, and drove to the hospital. Leo's disclosure. At the hospital, Kade went directly to Leo's room and found Uncle Wood sitting in the chair beside the bed, reading nothing, thinking nothing, the way people sit when they are keeping watch. He nodded to Kade. Kade nodded back. He checked the corridor for nurses and, finding it temporarily clear, took the knife out from under his jacket. He stood at each position Ploy had described, the head, the stomach, the 4 corners, and used it in the way that had come to him in the dream. It was a series of gestures that he would not have been able to explain if asked to justify them, but that felt precisely correct in the way that things feel correct when they are simply true. He finished at the 4 corners. He turned back to the bed. He said some words, not loudly, but in the tone of someone who means what they are saying. He put the knife away. He sat down beside Uncle Wood, and they waited. Nothing appeared to happen. The nurses came and went, and adjusted drip levels and checked readings and wrote on charts. Kade had been sitting there for perhaps an hour, quiet enough that Uncle Wood had fallen asleep in the chair, when he heard a sound from the bed, not speech, just a sound, the kind a body makes when it is coming back to itself from a great distance. He watched Leo's fingers move, first the left hand, then the right, then a slow, effortful motion of the eyelids. He did not wake Uncle Wood. He sat forward and waited and watched. Leo's eyes open, not fully, not clearly, the lids still heavy, but open. Leo looked at the ceiling. He looked at Kade. In the old sharp voice, still faint, but unmistakably his, he said, "Well, at least someone actually showed up." The nursing staff was called. The doctors came and asked Kade and Uncle Wood to wait outside, and they waited in the corridor for 40 minutes while tests were run. Then a doctor came out and said that Leo was showing remarkable response, reflexes, responsiveness, some voluntary movement, and that the trajectory had shifted in a way that warranted careful optimism. Uncle Wood started crying, quietly. Kade sat with his hands in his lap and felt something in him that was not quite relief and not quite vindication, but was something he could not name and did not try to. Leo spent several more days in the hospital, aggressive, demanding, attempting to negotiate his discharge before the doctors were satisfied, claiming he would simply not pay if they refused to release him, which the doctor told Kade quietly was not actually finally released. He insisted on being driven to a temple before going home. He sat in the back of the car and pointed left and right at turnings with a great deal of authority for a man who had just been in intensive care. He stayed at the temple long enough to speak with the monks he knew there. Then he allowed himself to be driven home. Once inside his house, he called his 3 children. The eldest went by Kiart. The middle one went by Leo's own diminutive. The youngest went by Sit. He spoke to them in the living room for what seemed like a very long time. Kade was not present for this conversation. He learned the content of it later through Leo himself over several evenings in a hotel room. Leo had chosen to stay there rather than remain in the house while certain matters were being resolved. What Leo had told his children that afternoon was as follows. The family business was multiple factories across 2 decades of accumulated work. It had a monetary value that Leo estimated in rough figures at somewhere between 2 and 3 billion baht. The 3rd factory was most recently built and still carrying debt. It was to be paid clear from the family's cash reserves. Leo had arranged this before going to the hospital. The 2nd factory, the middle one, would be held in trust. He intended to discuss its future management properly once he was well. The 1st and largest factory was something he had not yet addressed. What he had addressed was the matter of Kiart. This was the part of the conversation that changed the temperature of the room. Kiart was the eldest. Kiart had lived in the house longest, taken responsibility longest, and had the most legitimate claim. What Leo told him quietly and without preparation was that Kiart was not biologically his. A family consultant had suggested years earlier that caring for a child who was not one's own would encourage one's own children to come. They had tried for years before adopting in this informal way. The method had worked. Leo and his wife had 2 biological sons afterward. He had never told Kiart. He apologized for telling him now in this way in these circumstances. He had prepared a house that was separately purchased and paid in cash. He had also prepared a sum of money. He asked only that Kiart understand. Leo told Kade afterward that Kiart had been extraordinarily composed. He had said nothing negative. He had asked no questions designed to wound. He had simply accepted what was being said with a quality of stillness that Leo found, in retrospect, more troubling than anger would have been.